Oh, I'm Paula Bolton, co-founder of Lesbian Labour. Welcome to our Proud Lesbian series. During Pride Month, I'll be interviewing a wide range of lesbians to gather lesbian perspectives and to hear about lesbian lives in 2022. And with me for my 11th interview is an expat Londoner in Scotland, known as Linda Semple. Hello, Linda.
Hello there.
Would you mind starting by talking to us a bit, Linda, about your lesbian life?
Gosh, my lesbian life. I suppose I probably came out in the sense of going out and doing things in sort of lesbian places when I was at university. And I was kind of led into it through feminism, as many women were. So we're talking about 1976, 1977, 76 when I started at university. And the very first thing that I got involved in, and it's very apposite at the moment, was the abortion law reform campaign, and the National Abortion Campaign. And we had a women's group at university, and we got involved in the work. And I think it was the Benyon bill attempt to restrict abortion at that time. So I was very involved in that. And through that, I got to know a lot of lesbians who were actively involved in the pro-choice campaign at that time. And I also went along with our women's group that was looking specifically at the abortion issue to a meeting of Sappho.
Oh, right.
Which was the sort of lesbian meeting group that Jackie Forster had set up at the Chepstow pub in Notting Hill. And so I went. Can
I just check? So were you at uni in London then?
Yes, I was. Sorry, yes. I was at a place called Bedford College, which was one of the colleges of London University. And wonderfully, it had been a women-only college. It had only recently become co-educational, and it was renowned for, I think it was one of the first women's colleges, and our scarf was the suffragette colours. So I think I was probably programmed to it from an early age. So I'd gone along to the Chepstow, and we were there ostensibly just as the women's group to talk about the issues around the abortion stuff. But I thought, oh, this is interesting, quite like this. And the next meeting was with Maureen Colquhoun,
the
Labour MP. And it was just at the time when she had been kind of outed and was fighting with her constituency who were trying to deselect her, and it was all very messy. And I remember being really quite horrified by all of that, and at the same time thinking, I think I found my tribe. And I didn't really do anything about it while I was at university. And then when I graduated, tell me if this is going on too long.
Oh, no, it's fine.
When I graduated, one of the first things I did after graduation was I went to the Sappho offices and said I'd really like to help. I'd like to volunteer. So I started doing work on the magazine and helping with the events at Chepstow. And through that, I met my first kind of official partner, I guess, proper partner. There'd been the odd, crush and fumble before that, but first proper partner. And I also was asked if I would like to go and work at Gay News.
Oh, crikey. So you were right straight in, weren't you?
Straight in.
What had your
straight, probably.
Sorry, what had you studied?
Oh, it was really, really relevant. It was Latin. Latin,
right,
Latin,
Greek, and English or journalism or something very relevant, but no, Latin.
No, Latin.
Jolly good.
Well, I think it actually was relevant because what I went to Gay News to do was to proofread the paper. So I could string a sentence together and I knew what punctuation was. And I kind of knew culturally about, I could spot if the poem was scanning wrongly when it was being printed. So I then met my next partner, who was also working at Gay News, and I had moved into a room next door to the Sappho offices So I really was right in the heart of it. And then I, sometime after that, so we're rushing here through the 70s and the 80s, I was appointed the manager of Gays the Word bookshop.
Books. Now
yeah,
I know why
books.
the question about books is important.
Absolutely. So I was I'm trying to remember what order. No, so this is the wrong order. So the first thing that happened was I went to work for Only Women Press, the wonderful Lillian Moen's women's press. And not only were we publishing books, we were actually printing as well, because we had a very lesbian Marxist view of the world, which is you need to own the means of production. And that actually means being able to do everything from writing the books to printing the physical books, because you could never guarantee that lesbians were going to be allowed to do that at that time. So I learned to print on a printing press, to sort of typeset books, how you put books together. And then at the same time, I went to work for a gay press called Brilliance Books, where one of my co-workers, who was in charge of the fiction list, was someone that you might have heard of, called Jeanette Winterson.
No, I can't.
Yeah, so I don't know whatever happened to her. I think she ended up in some sort of obscurity. So she was in charge of the fiction list. I was in charge of a whole range of things to do with the production of the books. And the two gay men who owned it, who were wonderful, Tenebris Light and Roy Trevelyan, who owned it. Tenebris is now no longer with us, unfortunately, but Roy, I believe, is still around. And we were the first people to publish Fiona Cooper. We published Aileen Latourette. We published the gay male filmmaker whose name's just gone straight out of my head, who published a book before he did lots of films. Anyway, and we've also notoriously published the Gertrude Stein cookbook, with the recipe for hash brownies in it, for which we got into trouble. But it was an interesting time, because there was Only Women Press were radical lesbian feminists. Brilliance Books was predominantly a gay male run organisation, although lesbians were working there, and they did publish roughly 50-50 gay and lesbian books. But there was always a conflict, because the radical lesbian feminist collective didn't think I should be working also with the gay male group, because I was only part-time with both of them. I was doing 2 days a week with each of them, and then doing my days at Gay News. So there was all of that. Then when that all finished, it didn't finish. I then got asked if I would go and be the manager of Gays the Word.
Okay, so just unpacking a bit of that must have given you a very valuable insight into the way those different worlds worked. And have you retained that ability to step into those different camps?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm not engaged in much of that now. But I think at the time it was a very useful thing to do. And it also allowed me to think very hard about my own political philosophy. Was I going to be a lesbian separatist? Was I going to join with gay men in the struggle for lesbians and gay men and bisexuals? Was I going to be politically active? Was I going to work mostly in the cultural field? Was I going to do all of them? And I think what came out of that, because I started working at Gays the Word just as the notorious Customs and Excise raid had happened. So when I went in as joint manager, the board of directors were all being prosecuted by Customs and Excise, and that was really amazing activism, because we got such support. We got a lot of support from the labour movement, parts of the labour movement, we had a Labour MP for the area where Gays the Word was, and his name has also just got it. See, this thing about getting older, I'm 65 this year and I can't remember names. Frank somebody, I'm sure it will come back to me. He was incredibly supportive, and that also went on when we get on to talk about lesbians and gays to support the minors, which we will. But he was terribly supportive of us. He wanted to, he raised it in Parliament. Certain other local MPs were conspicuous by their absence of support. A certain Jeremy Corbyn, for example. We had other people who were incredibly supportive. There was a fairly newly elected Islington councillor who was right with us, called Diane Abbott.
Wow, God, this is a name check one, this is. Liz.
Yeah, so, you know, but having said that, it wasn't just Labour MPs. We had a fair few Tories who, on the quiet, you know, we're talking here about Thatcher land, you know, but there were MPs who supported us. There were MPs who gave us money for the Fighting Fund. And the literary community, absolutely right behind us. Yeah. When we had events at the shop to raise money, we got, you know, Beryl Bainbridge and Julian Barnes, and because they saw the censorship implications of what had happened to Gays the Word. Because I don't know how much you know about it, but I mean, Customs and Excise had come.
I was just going to say, I know about it and you know about it, but others listening to this maybe don't. So give us a quick synopsis of what had happened.
Quick synopsis was that Gays the Word used to import books from America, and we were always really careful because the Obscene Publications Act was always a bit difficult, and it's better now, but around then it was difficult, and there were all sorts of bizarre things in the Obscene Publications Act. So, for example, you could have a photograph of a naked man, but his penis couldn't be any more erect than the Campbelltown Peninsula on a map. And it's so basically it couldn't be at any more of an angle than that. If it was more of an angle than that, then the police could seize your photographs or your book or whatever it was that had utter bizarre things. Line drawings sometimes were considered to be obscene and sometimes not. And the definition of obscenity was that which is likely to degrade or corrupt the average person reading it. And so all the various court cases, the Well of Loneliness, all of these things, when they later came to be fought, it was about, would this piece of literature or this image degrade or corrupt somebody who might come into contact with it? So it was incredibly complex. And the reason I know that is because, amusingly, at the same time, I was actually called up for jury service, and it happened to be an obscene publication. Yeah, it happened to be an Obscene Publications case. So that was amusing. Anyway, but Customs and Excise were always watching Gays the Word, and they were always watching the imported books. There was never anything in the imported books that they could pick up on, because the board of directors who did, you know, and the people who did the ordering were very, very careful. This was, we knew that we were under surveillance, because often the book boxes would arrive and they had clearly been opened and the books had been thrown all over the place and then shoved back in the boxes any old how. However, I don't think we ever found out where the order came from, but the police have to have very specific reasons for raiding under the Obscene Publications Act. Customs and Excise have pretty much carte blanche to raid anyone that they think may have been importing material, and the bar for obscene material being imported is lower than the Obscene Publications Act. It was then, it's changed now. So they raided Gays the Word. This was before I was working there, and just stripped the shelves, took everything. They took, you know, Gay News, they took Oscar Wilde, they took Rita Mae Brown, they took everything. And having done that, and having stripped the shop of its entire stock, which could have bankrupted us, they then had as long as they wanted, really, to go through it. They didn't have to give us it back. They didn't have to tell us what they were doing. It was an attempt to put us out of business, without a doubt. So that rumbled on for 2 years. And the poor board of directors were basically under threat of jail. If they had been found guilty of importing obscene material, there was a significant fine and personal fines and personal jail sentences that they would have had. We had really good legal representation, specialists in obscene publication stuff and customs and excise law, many of them doing it pro bono, but we did actually manage to raise a fighting fund, so that was all right. And eventually it was just dropped.
I'm fascinated by this because I'm listening to you and I know you're talking about the then.
Yeah.
But it's going now in my head because we're back where we were. I mean, yeah. I'm just thinking about the, and crazily, actually, some of the stuff, like I'm thinking about the RSE curriculum at the moment and the totally inappropriate materials that are being put into schools, and to find myself thinking, oh, I don't think that's appropriate, knowing where this has, you know. And the other thing that I'm thinking, did you ever watch Better Than Chocolate?
Yes.
I mean, was that in it, that film, for anybody that doesn't know, actually is set partly in a bookshop where there is a raid. But I mean, do you know if that was ever based?
I don't know. I don't know whether it might well have been, because it was a big story. It was big in the gay presses around the world. We got a lot of support internationally. So, you know, The Advocate and all the Off Our Backs, the women's papers, all the papers that we sold, of course, were, you know, and was it Toronto Gay News, the Canadian one? They all interviewed people at Gays the Word. Right. So it was well known around the world that this had happened.
I might try and find out, actually, because that
would be interesting.
It is. I just you know, slightly sideways, I found myself watching Sherwood last night by accident.
Yes.
And the footage, the actual footage, and I was there. I actually was involved with the flying pickets and all, you know, the miners' strike stuff. And it's you know, it's so hard to get your head around that it really did happen. And what we said was happening.
Yes.
You know, and here's this piece of drama, which is a dramatization of something that did happen, but slightly fictionalized. And it's educating a whole new generation. Because I've already had conversations with people saying, that can't be right. What was that footage at the beginning? How did they get people to act that? And it wasn't acted, it was real. No, you know. No,
it wasn't acted, it was real. And it was played backwards in order to I think it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, let's skip forward a few years, or not a few years, a couple of years, to Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners. Right. So Mark Ashton and various other people formed Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners, and they came to us at Gays the Word and said, can we collect outside the shop on a Saturday? And I said, of course you can. You know, struggle is the same, and you know, anyway, we had a number of our customers complain about the fact that not only were we supporting the miners, but that we were potentially opening up the shop to get in trouble, you know, because the police wouldn't like it. And of course the police didn't like it. We had a sort of frontage on the shop, like a pavement area with, you know, a lot of places have these sort of glass lights that go down into the basement, out on the pavement. And the police said to us, you put 1 foot over that space and we'll be arresting you, chum, to the Lesbian and Gay Support the Miners people who were collecting. So we always had to say to them, look, just be careful, because the police will take any, you know, they have been told basically to get you if they can. But it was, we raised lots of money, and we used to hold events in the shop. As I say, people got some customers were cross about it. So the only the film Pride, which I absolutely love, is absolutely 100% accurate. Every single thing that happened in that movie happened. The only thing that wasn't accurate was that there were two managers of Gays the Word, and one of them was a woman, and that was me. It wasn't just a single man. And the other person who managed Gays the Word was Irish. He wasn't Welsh. So that was fiction. But everything else was correct. So much so that I still have, and I have it proudly, my honorary membership badge of the Delisle Valley Miners Welfare Club, because we all went down in the vans to take stuff down to them. And absolutely that moment at the end, because I happened to be the pride at the end of the film, where the miners turn up in Hyde Park. We had a float for Gays the Word because the case was still going on at that time. And myself and my wonderful friend Mike Harmon, who is still with us, now living in Spain, dressed as judges. Mike could fire eat, so he taught me to fire eat. And on the float, we had a cage full of books that were chained up. And we, in our robes, which we were rapidly sewing the night before with Lisa Power, who was helping us put the float together, under the influence, I suspect, of quite a lot of something. Alcohol. We were dressed as judges, full wigs, red robes, and we were fire eating all the way along the Pride route on the back of this lorry, shouting, "Burn the books." And of course, it was the one where the miners turned up. And it was so powerful and moving when those coaches turned up and those miners and their families got out and joined us and said, "You supported us, we're here to support you." One of the greatest political moments of my life, you know.
True solidarity.
Yes. Yeah.
And again, talking about the way life becomes a film, the number of young people who have watched Pride who understand it. And one of the bits that, I mean, you know, I'm a musician by, you know, training, but just singing Bread and Roses, you know.
Oh God, yes.
It just, this is why culture matters, isn't it? It just, and that scene, you're quite right, seeing all of the coaches arriving and them getting out, and the banners, you know, banners do it. Art does actually reach places that the other lagers don't get to. So,
well, here's a lovely aside about that. The Sappho banner, which was off with all these marches, the Sappho banner was on Pride, and it was on Lesbian Strength March, and you know, you'd see it, and it was this beautiful embroidered thing. It was purple with all this amazing craft embroidery on it, and I met the woman who had made it. She had made suffragette banners. There was a direct link. She was in her 80s, and she had made suffragette banners, or she'd worked on suffragette banners. There was a direct artisanal link between the suffragettes and the Sappho, the lesbian banner that Sappho had, which I think is now in the Glasgow Women's Library, or possibly might be in the London. It might be in the either the Bishopsgate or somewhere else. But anyway, it has been saved for the nation, which is great.
Well, it's amazing. I'm just thinking the rich, wonderful political culture that you actually came out into. What a fantastic time to be being a lesbian. And,
oh God, it was wonderful.
It's almost like there's a before and after, because at what point in your life did it start changing? I mean, you mentioned Pride, when Pride was political.
Well, we had the London Lesbian and Gay Centre.
Yes.
You know, the GLC was an amazing thing under Ken Livingstone. But we mustn't forget that it wasn't just Ken Livingstone, it was also Valerie Wise, who was Audrey Wise's daughter. And Valerie Wise was a Greater London councillor. And she chaired the GLC Women's Committee. And the GLC Women's Committee explicitly said, we want lesbian representatives on the Women's Committee, because as a Women's Committee, we founding principles of the women's liberation movement is to support lesbians in terms of their right to choose their right to be same-sex attracted. So the Women's Committee had lesbians on it, and then the GLC said, actually, we probably need a lesbian and gay group. So they then had a lesbian and gay group, which developed the very first public policy document on lesbian and gay rights, which was the Lesbian and Gay Charter, which the GLC produced. And I know that there's a lovely photograph of it being launched with Valerie Wise and Ken Livingstone, and I think Jimmy Somerville and Richard Coles, and can't remember who else. Oh, Rosemary Manning, of course, the author Rosemary Manning, who was in her 80s at that point. So that was and I was tangentially involved in some of the writing of that and the proofreading of it. So that was one of the very first sort of political moves, if you like. But if you think about it, as the film Pride quite rightly said, the act of Lesbians and Gays support the miners, and that solidarity is what prompted the Blair government, when it came to power in 79, to say, sorry, not 79, 87, yes, Thatcher in 79, it's just showing my age, to say, yeah, actually, we need to do this. And the unions pressurizing the Blair government and saying, the lesbians and gays were in solidarity with us, we're now in solidarity with them, you will put these changes through, you will repeal Section 28, you will move towards civil partnership, all of these things that then followed on from that. So that, I think, would take us through to the early 90s, I guess. I think that the closing down of the Greater London Council was a huge blow, because of its geographical specificity, if you like, it reflected the political will of London, which, as we know, is always completely different from the rest of England.
Yes. And
you only have to look at Brexit to see, 60% of Londoners voted against Brexit, which is actually slightly less than voted against it in Scotland, but hey, there you go. So London was always a more progressive place, just because it was. I mean, there were other enclaves then, Liverpool and Manchester and Birmingham and obviously Scotland, although I knew nothing about Scotland then, because people in England tend not to. But that was why the GLC was able to do that, because it had a groundswell of support from its voting population. And that's why the Thatcher government closed it down, and why they closed down the other municipal authorities who were progressive. So Liverpool, Sheffield, Birmingham, Manchester, the Newcastle, the municipal authorities who were able to reflect the more progressive nature of their populations. Of course, the Thatcher government closed them down. Strathclyde, obviously, that, in Scotland, that was the big municipal authority in Scotland. And they were also, of course, the Labour heartlands. So if you think about it, those authorities were never in a million years going to go Tory. They were always going to be red municipalities in a sea of blue. So of course they were going to be closed down. And I think that was the beginning of the change, because there was no longer a political home and a political support for lesbians and gays. I had gone back to the Labour Party. I had been in the Labour Party from the time I was able to join a political party, and I had left it in the 70s when I felt they weren't supporting the cause sufficiently. And I didn't have a political home. And then I went back to Labour because it was my party. The GLC, it felt that was, that was the place to be. But then, of course, it changed again, and I was in Scotland, and it felt to me that the party that fitted me was the SNP.
Yeah. Where are you now on that, Linda?
I'm not a party member anymore. And I am once again politically homeless, because I feel that there is no political party that represents accurately all of the things that I believe. And I think even those political parties who are almost there have things that are so far removed from my own political beliefs that I can't in all conscience sign up to them.
What would you say, who would you say is closest? Who's almost got it right?
Oh, God.
Where does, interestingly, where does Labour come in your running order? How far off track or near to getting it are Labour?
It's an interesting thing. So I'm a supporter of independence for Scotland. I felt that very strongly. I campaigned very strongly in 2014 around the independence referendum. I was one of the original members of Women for Independence, which brought us Joanna Cherry and Philippa Whitford and Jean Freeman and all these women who came from not being politicians to being politicians. I was very involved in that. I am still of a view that independence is the way forward, but the SNP has been such a great disappointment in terms of its lack of progressive activity, that I don't now feel that's the party that I can belong to, in spite of the fact that they are the only party apart from the Greens, who I wouldn't join, who have an independence proposal. Labour, I would be that close to rejoining Labour, even if they said, we don't support independence, but we support the right of the people of Scotland to choose.
Yeah.
That would do it for me, and that would do it for many, many people whose actual political home is Labour.
Yeah.
If we look at all the other policies, and we haven't even got onto the subject of women's rights yet, but that's a difficult one in terms of there isn't a party that is trustable, I think, at the moment. And it would be so easy for a political party to get this right. This is why I think it's been incredibly difficult. It's also why I've not been public talking about the gender critical stuff, because I think the parties are so missing a trick here. All they have to do is say, yes, there are things that we need to do to improve the experience of trans people, however they are defining themselves. I'm not a believer in self-identification. I think that way is not the way forward. But I do believe there is an unacceptably long waiting time for mental health services for people who are questioning their gender identity. And I think we do need to think about what do we do about that? How do we support people? How do we support young women in particular who are feeling so disenfranchised from their own bodies because of, the pornification of the world and objectification and all of that stuff that we know about? How do we support them to explore what that means for them? Are they actually lesbian? Are they bisexual? Are they whatever? Are they trans? What does that actually mean? We don't have sufficient resources to allow people to easily explore all that stuff around them. And I think that means people are making the wrong choices. So I think all of that needs to be worked out. So a political party simply needs to say, yes, we agree that there are things we need to do around that, whether it's the provision of more child and adolescent mental health services, whether it's more adult mental health services, whatever it is. I don't believe it's more access to drugs or surgery. I think that is something that is deeply problematic, and I would absolutely not support easier access to those things without gatekeeping. That seems to me to be something that we do need to have the conversation about. But what they also need to do, for a political party, for me to be comfortable back in it, needs to say, and we will fight to our dying breath for the provisions of the Equality Act and for the protection of those people with protected characteristics, including women. And there is no political party that is squaring the circle of those two things.
Yeah. I know.
And yet it would be so easy to do,
yeah.
I'm afraid.
And this is what we're trying to, well, we're constantly battling away within Labour to say that we've got both those things in your manifesto promise. So what are we doing about it? How?
Yes.
All right, that's what you've agreed without any consultation. That was plonked in. And it might not have been plonked in if there had been consultation, but we have to live with what we've got. It's in there. Yes. What are we doing about it? And if we've only just in the last few weeks almost, I mean, it's hardly months, begun to be able to comfortably say biology matters.
Yes.
After this long period of silence and intimidation of women trying to say exactly what you've just said and I've just said, you know, we have got an awful long way to go. I mean, it does feel as if it's slightly shifting, but not far enough and not fast enough.
Not far enough and not fast enough, and not in a way that allows for what everyone keeps saying is respectful dialogue, and I'm not seeing that. And that would require, for example, the Labour Party to agree that you can have a stall at their conference.
Yes.
And that the LGB Alliance can have a stall at their conference.
Yeah.
You know, we need to say there is no danger for a political party to have this debate in the open, transparently, and to facilitate, in fact, to make it happy, facilitate that debate and to make sure we get this right. And what worries me is a political party that can't manage debate and can't have debate and can't discuss is not a political party that I trust to formulate policy.
Yeah.
Because without the opportunity of hearing all sides of an argument, you can't formulate policy. Yeah. I mean, I once I moved to Scotland, my career completely changed. I went into the NHS, and I ended my NHS career seconded into government, where I was involved in basically healthcare policy. And although I was still paid by the NHS, I was effectively a civil servant. And if civil servants can't bring themselves to see the whole, or if civil servants can't go to their ministers, because that was our job, was to go to ministers and say, you really need to think about this very carefully. If you are formulating policy, you need to have all of this information, you need to have all of this research and evidence, you need to consider all of the options, you need to consult with all sides of the conversation, you need to engage civic society in all of its diversity, and only then can you implement policy when you have done all of that. And I don't see governments doing that. Well, scarily, I see the Tories doing it in England a bit. They are actually doing the engagement.
Finally.
They're led by a buffoon, which doesn't help. But I would imagine most things are going on in spite of Boris rather than with Boris. But I don't see it happening in Scotland. I don't see that engagement. And we've seen in the last week or more, we've seen the Equality and Human Rights Committee in the Scottish Parliament calling witnesses. And irrespective of what side of the debate you're on, you do not want to see a parliamentary committee only hearing from one side of an argument. Because next time round, it's not going to be your side that they're listening to. You want to see a parliamentary committee doing what it's supposed to do, which is hearing witnesses from all sides of a conversation and coming to conclusions in terms of developing policy based on the best possible evidence and research and information that they get from people. And if they're not doing that, then they're not doing it properly. Now, I'm a non-executive director on a couple of public bodies, which are ministerial appointments in Scotland. So I've probably just, cut my throat in being a ministerial appointment on these bodies. But one of the things that we are supposed to do as non-executive directors is implement government policy, or ensure that government policy is being implemented. That is the role of a non-executive director on a public body. But we are also supposed to take back to the government when we think there's issues that are being problematic, because that's our role as part of the reason that we're appointed. And there's a number of things where we would go back to the government and say, we think that you might be wanting to think again about this, because out in the world where we're dealing with this, it doesn't feel right. So I think as a appointed non-executive director in a public body, it's actually my role to say to the government, you need to be very careful about how you're managing these consultation processes, because they don't feel that they are appropriate. And as I say, irrespective of which side of the argument you are on, next time round, it might not be you that they're talking to.
How come on this particular issue, it is so one-sided, and how has the capture happened? Because talking to another Scottish interviewee, I pointed out how wonderful it felt down here. I'm in Corby, which is Little Scotland, so there's a lot of Scottish,
yes,
there's lots of Scottish stuff going on here. And during the independence debate, you could go into Morrison's, buy the Daily Record, and there would be a page for yes for independence, a page for no, equal column size, column length. This is the argument for, this is the argument against. And the ability to sit and talk about things seems to me part and parcel of the Scottish process so far.
Yes.
And it's something I've always looked up to. And when you see the Scottish Parliament sitting and turn taking, it you know, and yet on this, there's this absolute blinkered thing, which is happening in so many other places. So how has that come to be? What do you think's going on?
I'm actually not sure, because it does seem utterly bizarre. And you're right, it does seem, I mean, up here, it seems anti-Scottish.
Yes.
It's not the way it's
it's done.
You know, I say we, I mean, you know, I feel I'm we now, because I'm, you know, I've been up here long enough, and well, Nicola Sturgeon is always saying that a Scot, and she always very carefully says the people of Scotland, not Scottish people, because as she says, anybody who chooses to commit their future to Scotland and to live and work in Scotland is a Scot. So there you go, I'm a Scot. So I think that we do, and some people say it's the Enlightenment. I think it's because there's an underlying progressive hegemony in Scotland that is not necessarily there in England. So, for example, a few years ago, actually not that long ago, when there was a possibility that there were going to be conversations about bringing some of the American health providers into the NHS. And it was a Westminster thing. But the American healthcare providers were saying, we will only do this if we can treat the whole of the UK as a single unit, which means that, you know, you're going to have to include Scotland. The Tories in Scotland said, over our dead body, which was interesting. So there is a difference up here. And it has always been the case that debate and discourse and respectful, even if it's adversarial debate, is how things are done in Scotland. And people have talked about the referendum and said, oh, it was so toxic and horrible. No, it wasn't. You know, there were lunatics on each side, you know, there always are, who were going to shout and yell and call people traitors and do all that stuff. They were a vanishingly small minority. The vast majority of conversations about independence for Scotland were good-natured, they were informed, there was a recognition that people held views properly, and you would have that conversation. So I don't know how this has happened. I worry that it's a cynical move by politicians, that it's seen as a you know, it's a bit like virtue signalling, and having
With
got
bells
themselves
on now here, because if
yeah,
things change north of the border,
yeah,
I mean, it is going to impact, isn't it? If the GRA
oh yes,
changes.
yeah.
Do you, just to quickly ask you here, do you think there is any support on the ground for that proposal? And also the conversion therapy would be treated differently in Scotland as well. Is it popular support that's making this happen up there?
I don't think so, and I think it's that thing where, a bit like the Joe Cox Foundation survey, when you say to people, when you ask them, do you want us to change the GRA to make life easier for trans people? They say, of course we do. Of course we do. You know, we don't want people suffering. We don't want people anguished about their gender identity. And if that's a process that's making them anguished and is hurting them, of course we want to change that, because that's, people are basically kind, you know. If you then say to them, however, if we do this, it means that men who claim to be women will be able to take part in women's sports. Men who claim to be women will be able to be in women's prisons. When you say that to people, they go, of course not. Of course not.
Yeah.
So the kind of obfuscation around what it means is what is giving an appearance of public support. So the conversion therapy one, again, if you say to someone, do you want us to bring in a bill that will stop people being held down and thrashed with belts to try and change their sexuality? Of course, 99.9% of people will say, absolutely, let's bring that bill in today.
Yeah.
If you say to someone, what this bill will also do is it will stop a professional counsellor having a conversation with somebody about what is causing their gender identity crisis and investigating with them in a therapeutic setting whether or not they have a gender identity crisis or whether something else is going on. And this bill will stop them doing it. Everybody, 99.9% of the population says, no, of course not.
Yeah.
Of course we don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
So it's a lack of nuance in understanding that is making people feel that this is a good thing. And we can't seem to break through that discussion.
And I'm going to take you back to books where we started.
Yes.
Because in terms of the way messaging is happening, the way communication is happening, it's very different, isn't it? Back to your Gestetner, but, you know, actually printing press and making it happen. Everybody now is a producer of information.
Yeah.
And is this partly why, do you think, there's this absolute swamping of information and no critical thinking being taught? So how we shape opinion is different nowadays.
I think you've got about 4 different things there, all of which I would agree with. I am a huge advocate for social media. I think on the whole, social media is a force for good, and it can be a force for good. I think there are problems with it that mean that it's not always a force for good. I am absolutely an advocate for free speech if that free speech is not advocating actual harm. And we have a situation where often the definition of what actual harm is seen as somehow problematic. I am quite clear that as long as somebody isn't standing up saying, you know, kill the lesbians, then they should be allowed to say what they think. Because one of the ways that we deal with abhorrent beliefs is to allow people to hear them.
Yes.
And to hear that they're abhorrent and to hear the opposing views. I think the lack of critical thinking is really significant, because people will read social media and they'll be within a bubble because they will follow people who follow them and follow people who follow those people. So they will reinforce the thinking bubble, and what they won't get are the alternative views that allow them to do that critical thinking. You can only do critical thinking if you know there is an opposing view.
Yeah.
if you think there is only one view, there is no critical thinking to be had. And even if, you know, there's that whole thing, isn't there, about some people's minds are so open that everything falls out of them. And I think that actually happens. And if you believe one impossibly stupid thing, it's quite easy then to believe other impossibly stupid things. If you don't have that critical apparatus or that questioning, that Socratic questioning that says, hang on a minute, you've just said this.
What
Tell me about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, so there's that. And the publishing thing where everybody is a content creator, I think is wonderful, except if all you see is the content that reinforces the things that you believe. We need to see all content, and that's why the censorship within social media is so worrying, because it was all very one-sided. There was only certain content. Now I have no fuzzy feelings for Elon Musk or anyone like that, frankly. I would like to see social media less censored, and more on the side of free speech. I would like people to engage more with a wider range of views. And it's so easy to engage now. In the days when, you're right, when, you know, if we wanted to get a lesbian feminist pamphlet out, we had to spend 10 days producing it and typing it and rolling the Gestetner, and, you know, well, actually it was a bigger printing press than that, but even so, you know, and then stapling them all together and going out to bookshops. Nowadays you can hit a button and everything you want to say is done. But it doesn't mean that people are engaging with it.
No. Absolutely. And I mean, just coming, what's wonderful, Linda, in your completely unexpurgated version of your life there, we've hit all of the things, all of them that are on this piece of paper. So that's wonderful.
Okay, that's handy.
You've made my job very easy here. But just coming around to a bit of comparison, have you got any idea how it would be for young Linda now, if she was at university, coming to terms with her sexuality, coming out as a lesbian? What is there now for a young woman like that? And how would she find her way to any of the ideas that have helped shape your life? And in fact, clearly so many other people's, because you've been politically active your entire life, making changes to society for the better. How do we, you know, how would it be for a Linda now?
I would worry for her. I would worry for her because I don't think there'd be the plurality of communities that I had. So I could have chosen to be in any number of different types of lesbian community and groups, and there used to be a famous Gays the Word lesbian discussion group on a Wednesday night. I think if you take any 100 lesbians who are between the ages of, say, 30 and 70, who at any point in their life lived in London, 85 of them will have gone to the Gays the Word lesbian discussion group, because it was a non-alcohol, non-club place where women could meet and have a cup of tea and chat and talk about politics. And often people would come and present things. You know, Jeanette Winterson read an extract from Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit before it was published at the Gays the Word discussion group. These kind of things were there. I don't think those kind of things are around much. In universities, I think the cultural capture of universities is scary. I don't know where a questioning lesbian in university would find her tribe. And I would worry that if she was someone who was able to have those conversations about, well, actually, I'm not sure about, you know, all of this stuff, and I need to have a further discussion about it. And I don't know about the gender identity stuff. And, you know, simply by saying I wanted to have a conversation about it, would that person have been ostracized in the university setting? And that would be scary. And there wouldn't be alternatives. So you couldn't come out and go to another lesbian discussion group somewhere out in the world because they don't exist, which is kind of scary. Pubs and clubs, lesbian only spaces don't exist anymore. Did you watch the Gateways film? Yeah. I think I said on Facebook, I felt like my life flashed before my eyes because of course I used to go to the Gates. For a while I was a regular at a Sunday lunchtime. Sunday lunchtimes was much more laid back and kind of, you'd go to the Gateways over Sunday lunchtime, and then after that you'd go to, there was a place called Stallions in London that used to have a tea dance on a Sunday afternoon, and it was mixed, it was lesbians and gays, but it actually was a tea dance. You had tea and sandwiches and you did ballroom dancing. And then at 7 o'clock, the lights went down and it was a really, hot and sweaty disco. So, you could go from the Gateways to Stallions and then to this disco, and then probably what we would used to do after the disco closed at whatever it was, 11:30, we would head for one of the drinking clubs in Soho, one of the lesbian and gay drinking clubs in Soho, where you would pretend to be a member, which meant you could stay there until 2 a.m. And then at 2 a.m, you'd come out and go to one of the all-night cafes that was, predominantly lesbian and gay around Piccadilly. So there was all that stuff that you could do. And I don't think that's there anymore.
Yeah. I was just thinking about the discussion groups and books, and that, that one of the things about the pandemic and lockdown is that we've been forced to find ways to connect over the internet. And I'm aware of a whole plethora of things that's come up, and online book clubs being one of them. So we might not have Gays the Word, but we do have the Labyrinthist book club. So there are one of the advantages of this very medium that we're using here is this ability. I've been running a thing since the first week of lockdown called Lesbians Under Lockdown, and every fortnight since this has happened, different themes, which actually sounds just like that, a lesbian discussion group. And really what it was a source of succour to those wherever they were who might be isolated, and how are you during the lockdown. And the first woman to arrive was from Alaska.
Wow.
We had Alaska, Australia, Austria, all represented on that first call, and I have no idea how they heard about it. I have no idea how it propagates itself, but every single fortnight on a Thursday night at 7:30, a group of us will sit together and have these amazing discussions, and it actually gives an illusion of being part of a community. And you are, I mean, I took some convincing that the feelings engendered by contact over this false medium are in any way real, but biochemically they are. So, I feel very full the next day. I always feel like I've had a good night out the next day. I've gone nowhere. I've just sat here and listened to women. So I think that the gatekeeping that is happening around social media, even if we've created some of these opportunities and spaces, there's still a wall to be got through for young lesbians. How do they, because we've had to be private, we've had to go underground again in order to exist.
And you know what's interesting? Thinking back to Sappho days when we had the magazine, Sappho magazine, used to post it out to a few hundred women, most of them not in London. And that was their only contact. Even before that, there was an organisation called Kenrick that was set up, and Arena 3 was the very first magazine in the UK that used to go out to isolated lesbians. And then there were things like, the Women's Press Book Club, which used to send lesbian novels all over the UK. It was a friend of mine, Alison Hennigan, who used to run that, and it was brilliant. And one of the very first books that she had in her book club was The Secret Diaries of Anne Lister. And there is a connection here, because people used to find that book club incredibly empowering. I mean, my other half, Rona, said that was the highlight of her month, was when the little package arrived with all these lesbian books in. you know, that she would never be able to find anywhere else that used to come through her door. We went to the Anne Lister birthday weekend in Halifax back in April, and there were about 500 women from all over the world, predominantly lesbian, and I would say maybe 2/3 over the age of 50, in Halifax, going to events, going to discos, although being the age we were, when it came time to go to the disco at 9 o'clock, we both went, no, we'd rather have a cup of tea and go to bed. so we didn't actually go to the disco. But it was really energizing to be in a place with all these lesbians. And I don't remember that happening for about 30 years. And what's interesting is a lot of that started online. So
making the Facebook online real, that's what we need to do, isn't it?
Exactly. So I think the next move is to say, okay, we have these online groups, and I think it's absolutely brilliant that they go on. I mean, you and I are both on one of the secret Facebook groups where we have chat, and and it's mostly silly and about dogs, but hey ho, that's what social life is. Sometimes it's about talking about being a lesbian, sometimes it's about talking about your dogs or about Marmite. That's what it is. So we now need to say, let's keep those things going, but let's also give people the opportunity to meet in real life. And that's what happened with those very first groups. So Arena 3 and Kenrick did the magazine, and then the women were saying, we really need to have somewhere where we can come. And Sappho did the same. So at the Chepstow, we used to have, whenever it was on Tuesday night, someone might be absolutely terrified, and they'd come in and they'd come up to the thing where they paid their £1 or whatever it was, or 50p, and we would say to them, is this your first time here? And they go, yeah. And we'd say, right, let me take you over to meet Sally, and we'd have all these people who would welcome people into the group and chat to them. It wasn't a meat market. It wasn't, oh my God, here's a new one. It was, it was about community and safety and reinforcing people's abilities to be authentic and to live their proper lives, and to know that there were people that had their back. And that's what I worry that people now don't get.
I think that recreating in real life lesbian spaces is also, I would agree, the number one. And one of the bits of activism I'm involved in at the moment is actually finding out, where do we stand legally on that? Because we are a protected characteristic. Therefore, we ought to have the right to organise autonomously within the boundary as stated within the Equality Act. So, hopefully that'll happen, because what I always say is, if you don't want to be in a lesbian only space and you want to be in a mixed space, go and find one. There are millions of them. Every other space is now a mixed space. So go ahead. We're not stopping doing that. We're just saying we want our bit as well. So
and as you say, it's we're a protected characteristic. We don't have the same specific clauses in the Equality Act that women do, and the specific examples that women have, but we should have the right to have our own spaces, and if it has to be like the gateways, where it's actually a private members club and you pay 50p on the door or 20p on the door and you get a membership card, then I'm afraid that's how you do it, because that's how the gateways did it. And we might have to go back to those days where you say, bloody hell, it's what casinos do, isn't it? You can only go into a casino if you're a member.
I've never been to one.
Oh.
So you've obviously lived a much broader life than me.
So, I do think that's something that we need to think about.
I think you're right there. And what I would say is that, you explaining the way it used to be, we know how to do it. I always say, when people say about networking and like lesbian strength, you just glossed over that in your story about your marches and things, and you said in lesbian strength, we've started lesbian strength again. And September the 18th in 17th, in Leeds, there will be a lesbian strength march. So you know, those things are beginning to happen. But basically, those of us that are doing it because we've already done it.
Yeah.
You know how nobody's reinventing the wheel here. We're just doing it again. It's like dusting off your overalls and saying, right, I've got to get on with that again. It'd be nice to put our feet up.
It's lesbian feminism 101, isn't it? It's, you know, back to what we were doing. And I suspect that one of the things that needs to happen is something that's like Sappho and Arena 3 and all of those things in the new online world for women who are truly isolated, who have no other way of connecting and networking.
Yeah.
And it should be feasible to use social media to do that. And I'm not entirely certain how it would be possible, but I would think there would be a way of doing it, and I would certainly be up for getting involved in something like that again, because those things shaped my life.
Yeah.
And you know, I wouldn't have met my friends, my partners, none of that would have happened without those incredibly brave women who set those things up and, you know, ensured that lesbian community was there and available. I mean, one of the things about the Gateways program that was good but teary was kind of seeing those pioneer women who did that. And I also worry, and I mentioned Alison Hennigan, who did the Women's Press Book Club, and Alison was the literary editor at Gay News, and she's a friend of mine. I was actually in Cambridge a couple of days ago and had lunch with her, and I worry that we don't have the stories of these women.
Well, that is where I was going to stop. I was going to say, right, we've heard it first. Linda's got another plan, so she's the one we go to when we're trying to plan this next stage. But this exactly what you've just done, giving us an hour of your time to recall all of that. Here we have, this will be on social media. So, you know, for lesbians that don't know what a lesbian looks like, doesn't know what lesbian life looks like, there are any...
Wearing my Labyrinthist.
There we go.
I've worn a Labyrinthist every day for 40 years.
There you go. So there's the clue. You see symbols, you know.
Funny handshake equivalent, yeah.
Yeah, and we can't rely on the rainbow anymore. So we need to find ways of signalling and you know, dusting off our lesbian equivalent to the gaydar, really. But you know, Linda, thank you so much, because
you're very
a very proud lesbian and someone to be proud of. So thank you for all the work you've done over the years. And
okay, watch this space, I guess.
I was going to say we'll probably both be there in that
yes,
get off the ground meeting. Thanks very much, Linda.
You're welcome, Paula.